As a longtime Castlevania fan, one of the biggest arguments between my friends and I centered around which 16-bit entry was the best. We had all been fans of the series since we first played it on the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was such a cool mix of monster movies, action films, and of course, that unforgettable soundtrack that tied it all together. Even when the series had a less than stellar entry, it was still better than many of the options around it. By the time we got to the 4th generation of consoles, Castlevania had begun to expand away from its computer and Nintendo roots a bit, finally making its way to other consoles. It was here that we received Castlevania Bloodlines for the Sega Genesis and Dracula X Rondo of Blood for the PC Engine. Of course, we still got those computer and Nintendo entries, showing up as Super Castlevania 4 and Castlevania Dracula X for the Super Nintendo, and finally Devil Castle Dracula for the Sharp X68000 computer. You will rarely find a group of games from the same series released in a similar time frame that are as hotly contested as this lot. With that in mind, I have broken down our episode into categories to determine which of these releases did it the best. We will be looking at the story, graphics, sound, gameplay, challenge, and finally, an overall winner to see which one of these were the best. Remember, this is all in good fun, and it is perfectly okay for you to have a differing opinion to share. With that in mind, sit back, and I hope you enjoy the show. We have 5 distinct stories to begin our competition. Super Castlevania 4 is essentially a remake of the original game starring Simon Belmont. I love this one because it's so central to establishing the core tenets of the Castlevania lore. Every 100 years in Transylvania, Dracula returns to wreak havoc across the land and its people. The Belmont clan, renowned as vampire and monster hunters, make sure to engage this threat and end it before it gets out of hand. Set in 1691, it's become a focal point of the franchise, with many spin-offs and sequels branching out both before and after. The story here is told through a wall of text that scrolls after Dracula returns from the grave. Next comes Devil Castle Dracula for the X68000, a Japanese exclusive that itself was a re-imaging of Simon Belmont's quest to fell the evil demon and save Transylvania. There are numerous similarities between this game and Super Castlevania 4, some of them near 1-to-1 in terms of presentation. The opening cinematic of the X68000 game shows an evil cabal resurrecting Dracula to start the show. Another Japanese exclusive was Dracula X Rondo of Blood, a PC Engine Super CD-ROM release that moved the story along to 1792 and followed the adventures of one Richter Belmont. The story goes quite a bit deeper here than in previous games. The evil priest Shaft has kidnapped a number of women to lure Richter into a trap and cut short his vampire slaying intentions. These aren't random victims either. Among that lot is your woman Annette, as well as a 12-year-old girl that's related to you. This story is extremely important to the series as well, because it sets the stage for the direct 32-bit sequel, Symphony of the Night. Moving on to Castlevania Dracula X for the Super Nintendo, this is a retelling of the event seen in the PC Engine release. Here, Dracula kidnaps Richter's girlfriend Annette and her little sister Maria, setting the stage for yet another epic clash between good and evil. Our final story to go over is perhaps the strangest of the bunch, because it's so different from the others. Castlevania Bloodlines for the Genesis continued the tradition of Konami doing side and revamped stories for Sega's consoles. Here things are directly connected to real-life literature. It takes place in 1917 as World War I has decimated Europe. Elizabeth Bartley is the niece of Dracula and is using the death and destruction of the war to claim the power she needs to resurrect the mighty Count. You play as either John Morris or Eric Lacarde, 2 adventurers trying to stop her. John is the son of Quincy Morris, who fought Dracula in 1897. Eric is seeking revenge for his girlfriend being claimed as a creature of the night. Choosing one in this section isn't easy because I like them all, but the winner has to be Dracula X Rondo of Blood. Not only does it set up a number of iconic main characters, but it also has numerous enemies that would appear across a number of games in the same art style. It does all that while staying true to established parameters. The story here is as good as it gets in the older games. Visuals across the 16-bit games ranged from great backdrops with loads of depth, killer special effects, impressive animations, and outstanding art design. We lead off with Super Castlevania 4. This one gave us numerous Mode 7 effects like rotating rooms, bosses that would change size, and a zooming map to spice up the presentation. This was on top of the great color that was used across the many environments. Parallax scrolling punctuated gorgeous backdrops that seemed to go on forever. It was early in the Super Nintendo's life, but that didn't stop it from being one of its best looking games. Devil Castle Dracula for the X68000 is also a beast when it comes to visuals. Using the many colors the hardware could display and its ability to put up multiple background layers, it's easily in the running for the best looking of the bunch. It even mimics a number of special effects like sprite scaling and rotation. Dracula X Rondo of Blood for the PC Engine may have been released in 1993, but it was on hardware that debuted in 1987. You wouldn't know it from these screens. Just look at what this game puts up. Colors galore, detail that overwhelms the senses, and you would never know that the hardware lacks anything from those gorgeous multi-layered backgrounds. The bosses look great, the art style impeccable, and there are even some great cinematics to open the story. It's easily among the best looking on the platform. The Super Nintendo version of Castlevania Dracula X was a looker as well. It benefited from the great art style that adorned the PC Engine edition, as well as the color the Super Nintendo could display. I also loved many of the special effects they used in this one, some of which legitimately looked incredible. Finally, we have Castlevania Bloodlines, which took a much more classic approach than any of the other 16-bit entries. It looked as if Konami used inspiration from the NES games for the art, and it uses much smaller sprites than the other 16-bit entries. This could also be a side effect of Konami's focus on special effects. Bloodlines is loaded with some of the coolest, multi-jointed sprite work you'll see on this hardware. Bosses are massive and impressively animated. There is also a bunch of cool looking stage effects here, the kind of stuff that can distract you from the enemies. It looks so good. What this one lacks in color, it more than makes up for in other areas. Picking just one is a matter of taste, but this choice, when left up to me, has to be Rondo of Blood. The sheer variety in its environments, the iconic bosses, the art design, the backgrounds, and that use of color all stand out to me. Super Castlevania 4 is right up there with it in many of these areas, but I feel there is just so much to see in the PC Engine Classic. Every level paints a new place for you to do battle across, and each one is radically different than the last. It was nothing short of amazing what Konami pulled off on that hardware. It holds up so well that it was no wonder its art design would go on to inspire the series for years to come. Sound is one area where Castlevania, even the ones considered weaker entries to the series, always seem to shine. The haunting symphonic tunes of Super Castlevania IV were an emotional roller coaster at the time of its release. Much of that music began energetic and hopeful, then it descends into sadness and despair before picking up again. Devil Castle Dracula on the X68000 had a bunch of great renditions from the series past, bolstered by a few different sound modules that gave them each a unique feel. Dracula X Rondo of Blood used the CD technology to its fullest potential. Utilizing multiple composers and a mix of new and classic songs, the end result is easily among the series' best. Castlevania Bloodlines is perhaps the most surprising of the lot because FM synth is so difficult to work with. The team at Konami came through in a huge way, however, and the Genesis hardware sounds like it was made for a Castlevania game. A number of incredible ballads originated here, and some of the classic renditions sounded right at home. Finally, we have Castlevania Dracula X, yet another home run on the Super Nintendo when it comes to sound. What's amazing is that this soundtrack is radically different than Super Castlevania 4's. Konami recycled nothing and instead gave us another banger well worth listening to outside the game. A winner here is almost impossible because each one does so many things so well. Hell man, you could roll the dice and choose randomly and you wouldn't be wrong. But I do have a choice, and for me, the best sound category is taken by Devil Castle Dracula for the X68000. The previously mentioned sound modules gives this one an edge because you get such distinctive variants in each track. It's almost like getting 3 different scores in one adventure. I've prepared a sample for your listening pleasure. Gameplay is such a subjective category because we all have our own opinions on what feels the best when you are controlling an on-screen character. Do you want lots of different commands? Do you consider smooth platforming of paramount importance? What about the speed of the action? Despite these Castlevania games sharing many design elements in this regard, it was still amazing playing them back to back and recognizing the tangible differences that set them apart. I love the amount of control you have over the whip in Super Castlevania 4. Not only could you attack all around you while moving, but you could stop and snap it almost like a rubber band in any direction. It felt so good it should have become the standard for every game that followed. Devil Castle Dracula fell back on the traditional Castlevania experience for the most part. Not that that was a bad thing, mind you. You got a little more whip control than you did in the NES games, but otherwise it was fairly straightforward. The core gameplay behind Dracula X Rondo of Blood very much offered the same, but this one got a few nice additions. First we get the item crash, which allows you to use your sub-weapon as a sort of special move. It typically increases the area of effect and the damage potential. You also get stages with different paths you can take. These paths can not only yield different parts of the stage, but even a completely different boss encounter. This opens up Rondo of Blood to have 4 different characters you can find and save on your trek. One of those is your distant relative Maria Renard, a young girl that uses various magical abilities and becomes playable after she is found. Her gameplay and abilities add a completely different feel to an already great playing adventure. Castlevania Bloodlines has some nice additions as well. It has a second playable character that wields a spear and can attack upwards, spin left and right, and pull off a much higher jump. Our whip wielder gets a few nice moves like being able to attach his whip to ceilings and swing, plus attacking diagonally or down while jumping. The abilities of the 2 playable heroes allow some of the areas to split into different paths depending on who you use. These paths always come back together at some point in the stage. Sub-weapons have a secondary use by pressing up when activating them. It typically gives each one a larger area of damage. Overall, it was like a mix between the foundations of the 8-bit entries and a number of the 16-bit innovations. Castlevania Dracula X has perhaps the most difficult time among our choices here because it follows up a game many consider to be the best. Take away any feature or modify any gameplay and it's gonna stick out like a sore thumb. Still, for all the criticism that Dracula X on the Super Nintendo gets, I feel it plays well at its core. It still has much of the design that made the PC Engine original so well received. Item crashes are still in, some stages have multiple paths, and the quick retreat is still in there. Unfortunately, Maria is no longer playable, though in her place, there are now 3 different endings for you to discover. Choosing a winner for this category comes down to what feels the best, and that is for me easily Super Castlevania 4. The control you have over Simon's jump, whip, and sub-weapons set it apart from the other entries. I felt like I could defend myself from any threat, negotiate any obstacle, and fell any boss creature I'd come across. None of the games at the time made you feel like a skilled vampire killer with the tools to succeed like this one did. Every one of these games played great, but when it comes to getting everything right, Super Castlevania 4's gameplay was in a class all its own. One of the things I want to impress upon you before we pick a winner of this category is that the challenge of these games can make or break them for a lot of people. Many people consider Super Castlevania 4 too easy. Conversely, a lot of people consider Castlevania Dracula X too hard. Challenge can boil down to enemy placement, stage obstacles, boss patterns, and their damage, plus the typical allowances such as starting lives, continues, and the ability to save your game. Luckily, all these have either a password system in place, or in the case of Rondo of Blood, a save system. That means at the very least you can continue your adventure where you left off. Even with that said, the challenge varies wildly here. That variance is going to hit differently for all of us. For me, Dracula X Rondo of Blood is near perfect in this regard. It ramps up its challenge as you get deeper, and it never asks more of you than you've already learned. This is much the same in Devil Castle Dracula. It has the same escalation and challenge you'd expect, and most of your obstacles boil down to memorization, timing, and knowing when to be aggressive and when to pull back and wait for your opportunities. It's here where Castlevania Bloodlines rises slightly above its brethren. It uses a series of stage obstacles, mid-bosses, and its 2 playable characters perfectly, weaving an intricate balance of fun and difficulty. Add in the ability to tweak that challenge with multiple difficulty settings in the game, and you can have a blast whether you are a fresh-faced newcomer or a battle-tested veteran. They are all magical in their own way, but Castlevania Bloodlines is the clear winner for me in the challenge category. By my count, that gives us Super Castlevania 4 winning the best gameplay, Dracula X Rondo of Blood having the best story and graphics, Devil Castle Dracula taking the best sound, and Castlevania Bloodlines bringing home the best challenge. That appears to give Rondo of Blood a clear lead for our best overall winner. But hold on, because it's here we need to discuss the critiques and intangibles that could make a world of difference. Starting with Super Castlevania 4, one of the big side effects of its fantastic gameplay is the simple fact that it makes the game incredibly easy. Being able to so perfectly control your jumps in the air and attack in any direction gives you near unlimited potential to recover from any mistake. It's also linear and lacks any choice in how the adventure unfolds. Devil Castle Dracula on the X68000 feels great as a throwback to the classic action style the series is known for, but it also doesn't do much beyond that to stand out. Dracula X Rondo of Blood is a great mix of new ideas, a presentation bolstered by CD technology, and an impeccable art style. It has few outstanding faults, and certainly nothing that hurts it on any meaningful level. Castlevania Bloodlines itself is very similar in this regard, an extraordinary release that has little in the way of weaknesses. Visually, it does lack the color and impressive main character sprites of the other titles, but the special effects, music, gameplay, and challenge are S-tier game design that more than makes up for that. Castlevania Dracula X on the Super Nintendo is perhaps our weakest entry when all areas are considered. On its own, it's a fun action title, but there is no question it lacks much of the polish of its contemporaries when it comes to appeal across numerous areas. The largest of those is the most obvious. A better game that looks and plays like it already existed, and the changes made created a lesser experience. That leaves our two potential overall winners as Castlevania Bloodlines or Dracula X Rondo of Blood, the two entries that I feel get the most amount right and the least amount wrong. That battle is no easy thing itself, but the overall pick here has to be Rondo of Blood. When it comes to story, graphics, sound, and everything else that makes up this masterpiece, it's a hard choice to argue against. Bloodlines gets so much right, and I want to be clear, it's among my favorite titles ever, but I would have to be dishonest to elevate it above the PC Engine classic. Rondo of Blood is an ascension of the great design started years before, and the best of the 16-bit Castlevania entries. I want to end this episode by reminding you all just how great each of these games were in their own right. Depending on how you first played them, when you first played them, and what was going on in your life at the time, your answers to each of these categories can be very different from mine. And that is perhaps the beauty of the Castlevania series in general. These games are so damn good that most of us can agree they all were great games. Some of the best, in fact. Konami seemed to have a golden goose for the longest time, and I can honestly say I have never met a two-dimensional Castlevania I've outright hated. If there are games I covered in this episode that you haven't played, I cannot stress enough how much you need to try them out. They are among some of the most beloved software releases of the 1990s, and I don't think I've seen a bad review for any of them. Simply put, when a Castlevania was released back then, it made my must-play list immediately. It's one of the very few game series I own every single entry for, sometimes multiples from different regions. My gaming journey wouldn't have been nearly as great without them. I'm Sega X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.